back and thanks for staying with us. We are ready to convene this summit, and just before we do, I'd like to introduce our guests on today's panel. From our Tel Aviv studios, Dan Perry, the former chairman from the Foreign Press Association in Jerusalem. From Beijing, China, Professor Gong Jiong, Vice President of Research and Strategy for UIBE-Israel, and Carice, Witte, the founder and executive of director of Signal, joining us from Central Israel. A big thank you to you all for being here. And just before we get right down to the debate, Xi Jinping has been in power for now going on to possibly a third term. We want to have a look at exactly what this all means.
On October the 16th, the Chinese Communist Party will convene to vote Xi Jinping as leader for a third five-year term. This comes after Xi abolished the two-term limit a year into his second term, and there is a lingering sense that Xi will make China a more authoritarian state in his third and probably not last term in office. But it won't be easy for him. On the international front, there is the attempt at reunification with Taiwan, an operation that will not go down without a fight from the West. And on the home front, economic distress fueled by COVID and the war in Ukraine has shaken the world's second largest economy, and with reports of growing discontent among the Chinese people over the country's zero COVID policy and the supposed challenge from ally Li Keqiang on the cards, this may be why Xi is trying to consolidate his stronghold. But will he turn China into a dictatorship, or are we already there? How worried should the West be with Xi in power? What does a third term in power for Xi look like?
Before we open up the floor, let's start off with a lightning round. 30 seconds to make your point. What exactly does a third term in power for Xi Jinping look like? Dan Perry, start us off.
We have to remember that this is not one-person rule. It's not a dictatorship. It's an authoritarian state that is one-party rule. So the party has agreed to do this, if indeed they have agreed. If they give Xi a third term, that means they buy into his manner of rule, and that means we can continue with party support to see that go on. And I'm talking about nationalist rhetoric, some bellicosity vis-a-vis Taiwan, lack of economic reform, centralized control of the economy, forced integration of ethnic minorities, and in general, authoritarianism. This is not what the world wants to see, but we should undoubtedly be prepared for it.
Carice, Witte, your take?
Common prosperity will definitely be a focus where there will be a redistribution using a variety of tools to spread the wealth, if not grow the pie, because the economy has slowed very drastically, and it looks like it will continue on that path given what we just saw regarding COVID and COVID zero policy and a number of others. The Global Security Initiative and the Global Development Initiative will be pushed forward on the international front. There will be competition, increased competition with the U.S. A tech war will continue, and the international community will definitely be feeling Xi's new power.
Last but not least, Professor Gong Jiong.
Okay, I think China is facing a lot of difficulties. It's a very difficult time at this point. The economy is not doing well. The COVID policy is still in place. We have a war in Ukraine, which China is forced essentially to take a position. And there's, of course, this grand competition with the United States. With all these challenges, I think President Xi, I think it's quite likely, very likely, that he will be re-elected as the next leader for the next 5-year term. I think there will be some policy adjustments in the sense that, I think in the sense that China is going to continue to open up and carry on this reform agenda.
Everything has to change for nothing to change. I'm curious to know if this phrase applies to Xi Jinping as well. Carice?
I would say it's a very wise insight in that there's a lot of deep-seated cultural roots for what we're seeing with China, not just his recent history with the Mao era, but even the ancient empires and the rule of emperors. Xi Jinping reads the ancients, and he very much tries to integrate the wisdom from the powerhouses of the past into what's happening today. So I think we can expect to see the same, I would call it I would venture to say a kind of cultural revolution 2.0 in that we see China trying, the leadership of China, President Xi Jinping, strengthening the country in the way he sees fit. So Mao did it in his way by turning everything upside down. President Xi is doing it in a different way, but with the same goal of putting the party at the center and really focusing on bringing China back to a position of centrality. Talk about, history repeating itself.
If I may, I have to say, obviously, I agree that he sees himself as a sort of second coming of Mao, and indeed is concerned with and indeed obsessed with China as a 5,000-year civilization, not just a country of 100 years vintage. But as regards the phrase that you mentioned from the Leopard, I believe, in my reading of it, it comes from politicians who fear that greater reform and even revolution might come upon them if they don't do some reform on their own. And if I look at Xi, I see things going in the opposite direction. Rather than giving in to that kind of pressure to do reform, they're pulling back. If anything, they're cracking down on private initiative and enterprise in China and foreign-owned companies. They're going to go back to a centralized state. It is almost the opposite of that phrase, in my view.
Professor, would you like to chime in?
I like to challenge the notion that history is going to repeat itself in this context. I think China is highly unlikely to repeat the same disastrous outcomes during Mao's era. For example, the big leap forward, the Cultural Revolution. I don't think these things are going to happen. But I do want to point out that President Xi does have an agenda that's a little bit different from the last 20 to 30 years of the reform era, championed by Mr. Deng Xiaoping. I think the really important crust of President Xi's agenda is all about the people-centered agenda, what he calls the common prosperity. So he cares a lot about the people at the grassroots level, people are less privileged, people who haven't really benefited a lot from the reform of the last 40 years. I think these are the people he cares about, and he has a political agenda to benefit these people. I think this is noticeably different from the 40-year era by Mr. Deng Xiaoping. And you can call it a liberal agenda. Let me finish. Okay, you can call this sort of more of a liberal agenda or Democrat agenda in the sense of the American politics, but overall, it's or social. Even let's call it a socialist agenda. And I think this is it's okay. It's China has developed enough that it's indeed time to look at the interests of these people.
I'd like to just jump in there with regards to, both of you mentioned Mao Zedong. You've also spoken about the interests, the people. China is governed by a very strict set of rules, and it appears that Xi Jinping himself has actually broken one, known as the retirement age, in which you cannot run past 68. Xi Jinping is now 69. So the big question is here, is he aiming to stay in power forever, that he appears to have broken this rule? Dan Perry?
He clearly has made an exception for himself, and I think we're going to start hearing him be spoken of as the great leader, which harkens back to Mao. I have to clarify what I meant before. You're going to hear more and more of how he's a second coming of Mao, and maybe that can be a little bit flippant. No one thinks Xi is going to go mad with power the way Mao did, and also he couldn't probably get away with that in an era where even in China, information does sort of get around. So I'm not expecting another great leap forward, but I am expecting a highly centralized style of rule that is partly based on a managed personality cult, which will be somewhat reminiscent of Mao, especially in as much as he's going to be longer serving than any of his predecessors since Mao, who himself was, I guess, 27 years or whatever it was. But yeah, I mean, he is clearly carving out an exception for himself, and the key thing is he's being allowed to do it by the Chinese Communist Party. Chinese Communist Party wants to have this kind of rule because they must calculate that there is some benefit, at least to themselves and possibly to the Chinese people. I would be interested in hearing my colleague in China talk about how this is a better system than what we have in the West. No doubt we have many great problems in the world's liberal democracies, but the idea that a party of 100 million people, most of whom don't have any real power, should be ruled by 25 people in a country of almost 1.5 billion, I think is one that is distressed.
Professor, would you like to comment?
Well, I think this debate between the Washington consensus and Beijing consensus is not going to lead to anywhere. I think in every country is different. They have different characteristics. China has been ruled more or less the same way for many years. I mean, going back to thousands of years in history. And I think there's something unique about the Chinese culture, Chinese tradition, and Chinese society that has been pretty much accommodating to this political arrangement. If you talk to people, if you do a poll among the population, I think in general, and I can guarantee you this actually, the percentage of people who are still satisfied with the current governments, I would argue, and I would venture to guess that it would be higher, for example, as compared to the approval rate for the Biden administration in the United States. So I think I don't think it would be very much meaningful to get into this ideological debate about this system versus that system. I think we shouldn't be engaged in this conversation in the first place. I think among countries we should not argue over which system is better, mine over yours. And I think just leave people alone, leave country alone, and let's coexist peacefully and just try to strive for a better world. And as long as countries live together with the principle of peace and prosperity, and I think we should be okay.
Carice, I see you want to add something.
Yeah, there's a few points. If it were that simple, Professor, then I don't think we would have most of the conflicts or issues that we have had between sort of China saying it's the leader of the global south and that Biden is the leader of the developed world. Biden is running, maybe leading 37 countries, but Xi Jinping says, we have the numbers. And I think there are a lot of implications that show China's fear or the fear of the leadership, looking to decouple because they're afraid that the world will prevent them from access to important resources, looking to build asymmetries for the same reason. And when we get back to the term limits, I think we have to note that last month, I think on the 20th of September, new regulations were issued that ended term limits for all top cadres, which will allow President Xi to shape the leadership positions within China's party and the government, basically according to what he sees will be best for the future of the country. So I think it was discussed by many experts that term limits for the rest of the leadership was considered sort of the last vestige of the old order. So we're now seeing a brand new order. Nobody really knows what it's going to look like, but we do know that there, with all the discussion over Taiwan, with the visit of Pelosi, the response of China, there are a lot of things that people are worried about, both in China, outside of China, and we have to definitely improve dialogue and discussion in order to make sure that what you suggested, that we all live together in happiness and prosperity, is possible.
Right, and hold your thoughts right there because we do have to go out for a quick break, but I do want to come back and touch more on exactly what President Xi Jinping's rule or continued rule means for the world. So stay with us. 2 minutes, we'll be right back. Don't go anywhere.